All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Elizabeth Fries, and I am an outreach coordinator with the Human Services Center, and I'm also working with the Mon Valley Providers Council this year. The MVPC is a council of about 70 member agencies that work together to identify and address gaps in services in the Mon Valley region of Allegheny County. So the MVPC Working Group on Housing worked to provide this webinar for you today to equip you with the knowledge and resources necessary to navigate the eviction process in a time where, unfortunately, a lot of people are at risk of being evicted. So we are joined today by Gail Schwartz from the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, who's going to speak with us about the eviction process, as well as Jason Flowers from Omicelo Cares, who will speak to some of the resources available. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar, so please stay on mute throughout the presentation just to limit background noise. Feel free to utilize the chat throughout the webinar. If you have questions, you can throw them in there and we'll be sure to get to them. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end where you're welcome to unmute and talk, but until that time, please stay muted. So with that, I want to thank Gail and Jason for joining us today. And Gail, I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Hi, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me and having me participate. For those of you who are not familiar, the Housing Alliance is a statewide housing coalition. We really work to expand resources and promote, some common sense solutions and best practices that really help put safe, decent, affordable homes within reach of all Pennsylvanians, but especially those with low incomes. So I will say, I'm here to talk about the eviction process. I am not a lawyer, so I do want to be very, very clear on that. If you are currently somebody who is experiencing an eviction or is currently working through the eviction process, or you are serving somebody who is active in an eviction situation and you need specific advice on that situation, I strongly recommend that you contact legal services, neighborhood legal services, or the Community Justice Project, or the Allegheny County Bar Association to help get you the appropriate legal advice that will best serve your situation. But that being said, I do happen to know a lot about the process. I had actually asked a colleague of mine to kind of crash this meeting. Abby Ray, are you on the call at all? Maybe not yet, but she's been doing some really good work with some providers and supporting people in Allegheny County across as they negotiate these really, really challenging times. So I think for the point of today's conversation is, let's just talk about the harm of eviction. Let's do an overview of the process and the phases. Things are a little bit awkward right now because of the pandemic, and by awkward I mean terrifying and confusing and murky and unclear. And if you do think things are clear, then please explain it to me, because I look at this stuff every day and it doesn't feel clear to me. So it's, it's a really confusing and scary time. I also have a very vocal cat in the background who may make a shout out. I just want to acknowledge that no fat kitties are harmed in the making of today's webinar, in case that happens. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's see if I can do that. The eviction landscape. Eviction is more than a forced move. It's, this destabilizing event that really can drive families into a cycle of financial and emotional turmoil. It can really not only be the result of poverty, but it can be the continued driver of poverty. It really is just an absolutely detrimental event for the affected family. But evictions harms are not just limited to the household. Eviction really is a complex social problem that affects the entire community. So, you know, nobody bears the brunt of eviction more than families, more than the person who's getting displaced. But there are many other people who also feel the impacts of eviction. That includes employers, schools who, you know, really are struggling to have their employees and their students maintain stable attendance and be successful. Neighborhoods overall, landlords, courts, sheriffs, you know, landlords may be awarded these giant sums of money in court, but they rarely ever collect that money. And so it often has impacts on their business, and that could be felt by the other tenants served by that particular landlord, the courts, the sheriffs, child welfare systems. Far too many households are kept apart because there isn't a stable housing situation, and sometimes it does lead to family separation as well, which is absolutely detrimental. Emergency systems like hospitals, emergency rooms, criminal justice systems, all of these things really get impacted by eviction.
Hey, Gail.
Yeah.
We are looking at your file screen. Is there a flyer that we should be seeing?
There is a flyer that you should be seeing. All right, I'm gonna stop share and try this again. Why should be this one? Is that
Yep,
better?
that's good. Thank you.
Sorry, it's been a while since I've done that, but it's, you know, 1 o'clock on a Friday. So yeah, lots of people, lots of systems are impacted by eviction. So going, come on. There we go. So eviction is not a singular event or action, but it's actually a lengthy legal process. And there's also a process that leads up to the point of eviction. And there is, you know, a process and lengthy fallout after the eviction takes place and the family is displaced from the household. But right now, we're just going to focus on the eviction process itself. So most of the time, something happens. Something is happening in the household. More often than times, the triggering event is non-payment of rent. Somebody isn't paying the landlord. And so the landlord provides a notice to quit. Now, I will say in Pennsylvania, it is legal for landlords to put into their lease what's called a waiver of notice to quit. And if that waiver is present, which I would say in the vast majority of private leases, it is present, then the landlord doesn't even have to give you the 10-day notice. They can just go straight to the magistrate and file for the eviction. So the notice to quit is given. Now, a couple of things can happen here. A notice to quit is really just a formal, like, form template that the landlord can, you know, download, probably puts it on the tenant's door, something like that. So at this point, nothing has been filed with the court. There is no record, nothing like that. Sometimes people who are not familiar with the eviction process think that this in of itself is the eviction, and it is not. And so we see far too many people leave the property at the first sign of getting a notice to quit. And, you know, we hope that people don't do that, that they, you know, they stay, they have a right to stay, and try to work with the landlord to figure out solutions. However, if a solution is not figured out or payment in full is not received at the end of the 10-day notice, well, it's 10-day notice for non-payment of rent, 15 days for other lease violations, then the landlord can go to the court and file the complaint. Again, you know, tenants should be reaching out for help at this point. You know, you can absolutely contact legal services and see if you qualify for assistance. There is also a new program in Allegheny County called Just Mediation Pittsburgh. It is a mediation service that is specifically geared towards helping landlords and tenants resolve their disputes without going to court. So we strongly recommend that tenants reach out to this organization to get some support and some help. But that is what can be done at that phase. And then, you know, once the landlord files the complaint, the court then serves what's called a summons to the tenant. Within that summons, in Allegheny County, there should be like a palm card or a flyer included that will have, again, some tenant assistance resources included. But in the event, again, you know, tenants can call 211, something like that, and start to see if they can qualify for assistance services. There is a court hearing. It's so important that people attend their court hearings. Oftentimes in the eviction process, we see that people kind of accept the defeat because they don't have the money, they know they can't pay it and things like that. But we still always recommend that people go to the court hearing, even if they're not confident in their ability to rectify whatever the complaint is about. But you will go before a judge. If the judgment is in favor of the tenant, because, you know, maybe you were able to connect to legal services, or maybe you were withholding rent because there was a repair that wasn't done, or maybe you used your rent to pay for the repair yourself, any number of things, and the judge is like, oh yeah, that's cool, then, you know, you're not evicted and everything is fine. If there is a judgment in favor of the landlord, there can be a couple of options that happen. Sometimes the judge will order and say, you know, you have to be out in so many days. Or sometimes they can rule in a way that says, you know, if you pay the landlord in full by this set date, which is usually like, I don't know, 10 days, 14 days, something like that. If you pay that in full to the landlord, then you won't get evicted. And so that's called a pay and stay. And if that happens, then, you know, the tenant doesn't get evicted. If the tenant is unable to pay, then what happens is the landlord is awarded possession of the property. That means that, you know, the landlord can call the constable, and this is, you know, if the tenant doesn't leave on their own prior to the constable showing up, then they can be forcibly removed from the property, and that can happen. However, in this time between, you know, when the judge says you have 2 weeks to, you know, pay the landlord or move out, tenants do have a right to appeal the decision. Again, this is something where magisterial courts tend to be located in the neighborhoods. If you want to file an appeal, you usually do have to go down into downtown Pittsburgh and to the county courthouse. There is a help desk there, again, which is another point in the process that has resources that can help tenants address whatever issue. And so if you are in a position where, like, even though you know you still don't have the money, the landlord is owed the money, it might be worth it for you to go ahead and appeal so that you can, you know, get that stay and get connected to the help desk at Allegheny Court so that they, again, this is another opportunity for the tenant to access resources before they're actually displaced out of the home. And then it will go before the new housing court judge. You know, all appeals for evictions are reviewed by the same judge, Judge Hertzberger, I believe his name is. So it's somebody who really understands housing law, somebody who really understands the dynamics of eviction, and will, again, rule on the appeal. And, you know, we'll see if we can get folks assistance, and, you know, either the tenant can get to stay at that appeal depending on how the judge rules, or the landlord can again get possession or get awarded possession of the property. So that's kind of a really, really technical, complicated process that can be very, very overwhelming for anybody who, you know, really has to face not only this process, but also come up with that emergency plan of where are they going to stay if this doesn't work. So it's really overwhelming and hard. Things are further complicated right now because of COVID-19. Back in, I think it was September or October, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, issued a moratorium on evictions. This really was intended to stop tenants from being physically displaced out of their units. So evictions can be filed and the process can be started, but until December 31st, people cannot be put out on the street. If people are being put out on the street, that is in violation of this order. There is a declaration, a form, which I can send a link to you, Elizabeth, after today's webinar. I don't have it with me right now, that people can fill out, that was developed by the Pennsylvania courts, that people can fill out and give to their landlords if they meet certain criteria. And so they have to be under a certain income limit, they have to be income, you know, demonstrate that they are impacted by COVID and, you know, have lost income or increased medical bills. There's a couple other criteria. All of this is laid out on the form. And essentially what this form does is a tenant can fill it out, they sign it, and the form really states that, you know, they are attesting that all the information on the form is true, the same way as if they were testifying in court, and they can provide it to the landlord. I do believe the guidance in Allegheny County specifically is for them to also submit this form to the court system so that they have a record of it there. There's no supporting documentation that's really needed beyond this form. However, landlords do have a right to question its validity. And in the event that that happens, it might be good for people to keep records of, you know, the phone calls that they made or the emails or anything like that that they did to work and try and find resources. So, You know, it's always good to just keep a log or a document, just jotting down notes. Like on this day, I talked to 211. On this day, I called the Allegheny link. On this day, I worked with, you know, Rent Help PGH. Again, so that if, you know, they are ever questioned about whether they did their due diligence in getting assistance, that they do have, you know, that evidence, that documentation of support. So that's kind of the eviction process and what's really happening in with eviction right now. I know a lot of people are really concerned about what's going to be happening December 31st when the CDC moratorium ends. And right now, we don't really know. We don't know if the CDC is going to extend it. We don't know if the governor is going to do another moratorium when this one ends. It's just, there's not a really clear answer or any answer at all. We're very much in a position of wait and see. I think what we have seen with this pandemic so far when it comes to these resources is that we probably will not hear the answer to that question of what's next until probably the week of. You know, it was, it's just kind of the way that these things have been flowing. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, the courts issued what was called a judicial emergency, and that kind of, you know, disrupted the eviction process. Once that judicial emergency expired or ended, the governor created a statewide eviction moratorium that went on for a while. It wasn't until it was about to expire that he announced the extension, the one extension that he did for it. And then, you know, the CDC moratorium came into effect. It was, they announced it on like the 4th, like September 4th, and it went into effect 3 days later. So they announce things and it happens very quickly, and there's not a lot of lead out time. And I wish it was a better process, because it puts a lot of people in limbo for too long, but it is the way that things have been happening during this pandemic. So ultimately, we just are in a position of wait and see to see what local courts are going to be doing, what the state court may be doing, and what the federal government may be doing as we get closer to this December 31st deadline. So that is the eviction process in a very rough nutshell. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Gail. We do have a couple questions in the chat that we can get to before we have Jason present. The first question is, what if the lease is ending, but the tenant does not have another place to live? Can they fight to stay in the apartment?
They can. My understanding is that, you know, in order for somebody to be removed from an apartment, even if they've stayed after the lease has ended, that's called a holdover, and the landlord would still have to go through a court process. My understanding of state interpretation is that they don't believe the CDC moratorium actually covers that. You might want to check with the local county court rules to see if that works. To see if they're going to say that the CDC moratorium actually does apply to these holdover situations. Another thing that folks can do is COVID-19 is a public health crisis, and anybody who has certain pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable to this respiratory disease does have the option to ask for a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which really says, like, I have this barrier related to this illness, to this disability, that says, you know, like, I realistically need a 30-day extension on my lease, a 60-day extension, a 90-day extension, because it's so dangerous to go apartment hunting right now, because I have asthma, because I have COPD, because of, you know, diabetes or whatever the condition is. I need to stay here a little bit longer. And you can try and extend the lease through that process. Again, this is for people who have certain illnesses under the ADA and certain extended protections. And really, I strongly recommend that you work with, like, the Fair Housing Partnership or the county human relations to help you draft those letters and give you some guidance. But there is also that potential as well, that it's just simply too dangerous for you to move right now because of your disability or chronic health condition.
Great, thank you. And then we have a client who had an eviction explicitly regarding rental arrears that won in the favor of the landlord, and the possession order was granted for this Saturday. We were able to find a way to stop this temporarily, but I was surprised to see that a Pittsburgh court evicted and was removing someone during the moratorium over money. How is this possible?
Well, my understanding is that it's not supposed to be possible. So, I mean, this person should be filing an appeal and saying, you know, and you know, maybe notifying, like, the county courts or the court judges. I'm not sure. I mean, that's all you can do is appeal the decision. Like, if you don't think that this is right, if you don't think that the judge should have done that, again, everybody has a right to appeal these decisions, but there is a time limit, so you have to appeal it as soon as possible.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So there will be more time to ask Gail some questions at the end, but we're going to go ahead and have Jason on to present with us with some resources that might be available to help. So Jason, I believe you're on. I saw you in the chat.
Hello, everybody. So I'll be like as brief as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter with some sites, and then I'll go through some sites that is available to everybody. And just like Gail said, you know, eviction and you know what's going on, it affects the whole household, and it's holistic to everything that the family needs. So I'll go over several resources that, you know, include, of course, eviction, some resources that include, you know, homelessness and some food resources, and some sites that you or your clients, if anybody represents anybody here, that they can take advantage of. So one of the things that Gail mentioned was the eviction process and mediation. So I'm going to share my screen and try to get through these sites as quickly as possible. Let's see, share screen. I'll just share screen. All right. So Just Mediation Pittsburgh. She mentioned Just Mediation Pittsburgh. This is, they actually hosted a webinar for our organization, and this is free, free mediation services, and it's ran by volunteers. They're not attorneys, but they will help the landlord and the tenant come up with some type of resolution, if there can be any, before you know, they finish the legal process, the court process. So this is a pretty good site. Dan Sullivan is kind of the advocate for this. But you know, if you click on tenant, you do have the link in the chat. It kind of goes, it's an intake form, and they fill it out, and they'll match you with a volunteer mediator, and kind of learn what's going on here. If you click on landlord, let's see, okay. If you click on landlord property manager, if there's a landlord on here, kind of goes through the same information on this site here. And there is the mediation process sheet, and I'm going to kind of pull up the slide here so you can kind of see a little bit better. This is a mediation process sheet, and this can be sent as an email to everybody. But this is what they use through just mediation. But this is basically the full process for mediation. This may be in Gail's Gail's explanation, but this kind of helps you or the client representing understand the whole mediation process. But if you do call Just Mediation Pittsburgh, they will, you know, they will let you know and be patient with you and your client to understand what, you know, how the process is, how the process goes. Help you and your client get through the process. Let's see. There's a site. It's called Legal FAQ, legalfaq.org. If you go to this site, it'll answer some questions, PA questions. Legal FAQ. You can ask questions for renters in PA. So there are several questions here that can, you know, some of you put in the chat that can be answered on this site here, right? Legal frequently asked questions. Talks about the moratorium, you know, different things of that nature to kind of help. You can send to the people that you represent. This is a pretty good site, and I guess it gets updated periodically. Excuse me, I'm going back and forth here. The Housing Alliance of PA. This is Gail's organization. She didn't pick up an organization, but if you go to the Housing Alliance of PA, you do have the link in the chat. It just gives you updated information on rental assistance and eviction information. And if you click on this exact link, you can actually go to the regular website of housingalliancepa.org. You can kind of navigate through it, but this gets you through the understanding of rental assistance and eviction information that, you know, Gail presented, and other information that you're not privy to. This is for your own purposes and for your client. If your client has any questions, you can kind of refer to this. The Housing Alliance of PA is a great resource for what's going on and just in housing in general. So if you are in the housing space, the Housing Alliance of PA, it's a really great resource for understanding what's going on in the market today. Am I right, Gail? Oh, she's not. She's doing something else. Okay, good. All right, let's see what else is going on. I do have a site that's one of the things as far as the holistic needs of somebody going through eviction is utilities. There's a link here that talks about, and let me see if I can. It's a link for the PA Gov site, but everybody should know that November 9th, the utility moratorium was lifted for utility bills, so they can actually shut your utilities off now, give you a 10-day notice, And, I would encourage whoever's on a call that is a tenant just to, work it out with your utility company, or just go to, this link, or look at this link. Kind of talks to you about what you should do if you have any issues with utilities. And but just be in mind, just hope everybody knows that it has been lifted last week, and utilities can be shut off right now. Let's see here. Okay, next escape here. And then, of course, housing and support resources. I got East End Cooperative Ministry. That's in the East Liberty area, but they serve the whole Pittsburgh region with food, housing, and preventative measures. You can always call that office. The Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. If you guys don't live, if you or your clients don't live in East Liberty area, and you want food, a closer location for food services, you can call the Pittsburgh Food Bank. They supply food to the majority of the pantries in Pittsburgh. There are some pantries that fill their pantries up with their own food, where they do their own shopping. But the Pittsburgh Food Bank, they cover the whole area. And if you go to that link, they would be able to let you know what's out there in your community that they provide food with. And then you have the Allegheny County homeless assistance website, and that's on here. That's also in the chat link. And if any of your tenants have gone through the evictions process, and they're about to be evicted, you can send them to that website, and they'll be able to work with you. And it could either find temporary housing, or find you a shelter that you have to connect with. But this is a real good initial go-to resource for you. I know there's a couple of providers on here that probably know this information, but if you're not a provider and you are a tenant that's facing eviction, then this is a good site for you to go to. And I'm just making sure that there were not any other sites that I had up that you can kind of take advantage of. There's so many resources. I just want to give you some initial resources that has been presented during this whole time that I've been a part of, and some stuff that you probably haven't heard of recently. And the last resource, if you are a landlord, my organization, Omicelo Cares, we do have landlord training, and we do talk about mediation, but that landlord training won't be until in the first quarter next year. But you can always go to Omicelo Cares website. But I think this is more people that are interested in learning about how to stay off eviction, or how to get through it. But that's all I have here, Elizabeth. But I actually included all of the links that I shared with you. You can kind of navigate through the websites that I shared with you in the chat room. But if you have any other questions, I'll answer them to the best of my ability in regards to resources, because I've been connected with several organizations that are part of this process.
Thanks so much, Jason. So thank you actually both to Gail and Jason, and I will be sending out these resources for you guys. So if you can't get them out of the chat, I'll be sending it out in a follow-up. But if there are any questions at this point for either Gail or Jason, you guys are welcome to unmute and ask them, or put them in the chat, whichever one you're comfortable with. There is one in the chat that we can start with. It says, I thought they were not shutting off utilities in the winter. Is that not the case?
So there is a winter moratorium, and I think it starts like December 1st and goes through March 31st, something like that. It's a little bit complicated and clear right now. There was, this blanket moratorium for utilities statewide that got lifted. Now folks have to, contact their utility company and see if they qualify for some protections, which folks who are up to 300% of the federal poverty guideline should be covered. And then there's also kind of the standard annual moratorium that does take place. But again, even though moratoriums are in place, payment is still due, right? So payment is always due. And right now, whether you're dealing with a landlord and you can't pay and you're protected under the CDC moratorium, or you are behind on your utility bills and you have some protections through the regular winter moratorium, or have gotten this additional protection for COVID impacted folks. You have to talk to people, and you have to just pay what little bit that you can. Like, even if it's far below what the normal rent is, it's about making that good faith gesture of just saying, like, I recognize that you need this, right? Like, this is the agreement that you have with your utility company or with your landlord. Even if you can't pay all, pay some. If you're struggling to have those conversations, I did put a link in the chat to provide information about the utility moratorium, but also Just Mediation Pittsburgh is a great resource to help you have that that hard conversation. These are not easy conversations. It's very easy for me to just say, hey, just tell them you're going to pay what you can. Like, it's scary all around for many different people right now. But it is important to find those arrangements, and there are people out there to help you have those really hard conversations.
Are there other questions for Gail and Jason?
Hi, is it possible to get a copy of the flow chart that Gail shared about the eviction process?
I can definitely send that to you, no problem. I think one of the best things to remember right now, especially for anybody who might be active in the eviction process, is, even though, like, you're supposed to pay rent and you haven't paid rent, and, things are hard right now, but, especially like the situation that was brought up earlier, like, you can appeal every decision, and you should be just reaching out for as much assistance and help as you can. It's it's a really challenging situation for all people, but if you feel like you've been filed against wrongly, that it's against the CDC moratorium, or you think that a judge acted in a way that was not fair, again, just appeal that decision. I know that it's hard. I know that it's scary. I know that it just is, a big undertaking to make it all the way down to downtown Pittsburgh to do that process, but it can help you in the long run, I think. It's not 100% guarantee, but again, nothing is a guarantee right now, but it's okay to fight it.
Somebody somebody mentioned legal services, and um, if you are a tenant, I know, Gail, you mentioned legal services.
Mhm.
I did have that site up. That's one thing I didn't mention. But
Yeah.
neighborhood legal services is a good place to start in your initial process if you are being evicted and you don't have the financial resources to help fight that. I think they cover, you know, your first issue that you have. So it's called Neighborhood Legal Services. I'm going to type it in the link.
Right. And you know, for any of these resources, you can always dial the United Way 211. Like that line is really designed to help you to get you to the right place to address your needs. So it is important.
All right, we've got a couple questions coming in. If a client submits a CDC declaration form, what happens to the case? Is it closed or is their hearing just rescheduled for the new year?
Mm.
I'm not an attorney, and so I can't really give advice on a specific case like that or on court processes. I think there's just so many other extenuating circumstances that could be taken into consideration. And, you know, Allegheny County has a lot of magisterial judges, and I think they're all people and people do things differently. And, you know, I think that's really scary and challenging, but that is the reality. So if you have a specific instance like that, again, consulting with a practicing attorney is your best bet.
So
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I see the question about, are there any protections for tenants who are being harassed and threatened by the landlord? What can the tenant do to ensure they feel safe? Um, I had a really close friend that lived in Pittsburgh, and they um, they wasn't going through eviction, but um, they had a sewer issue that wasn't being resolved, and they ended up calling the health department, and they told the landlord they needed to rectify that, and the landlord called the tenant, and the tenant was like, the landlord, said, I can't believe you called these people on me. Well, I called my friend who was an attorney, and the attorney sent the landlord a note saying, you need to fix this, or you need to give my client some time to move out and find a new place to live. What a lot of landlords do, tenants need to be protected, and sometimes when you don't have an attorney or somebody to represent you, you can be taken advantage of. So I would recommend your tenant to call programs like Neighborhood Legal Services, and they can probably help you. If they can't, I'm pretty sure they'll forward you to a resource that can. And they can have an attorney to send that note to stop something like that. But there's not much else that tenant can do if they're being harassed. But they need some type of legal representation to save them from that type of behavior. So, but I typed in Neighborhood Legal Services. That's a great resource to help with something like that.
Another thing that people can do is the state attorney general's office has prioritized complaints about landlord-tenant issues, and there is a consumer protection hotline that you can call and report your landlord and say that this person is harassing me. I did the declaration, I've done my due diligence to try to get help, I'm trying to communicate with them, and they're just really, really hostile or calling me all the time, or doing whatever, because this tension is coming up in places all over. So you absolutely can call that hotline. I'm putting it into the chat now. is another option. And then of course, this is also a space where mediation can help. There are times where this may be able to be resolved through that process. But yeah, I would definitely contact legal services, contact the Attorney General's office, if you don't believe that you could mediate your way through.
And I had a question about the Just Pittsburgh mediation. Do you know if that's only for the city of Pittsburgh, or will they serve anyone in Allegheny County, or?
I believe they're countywide.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I don't see any more questions at this time. So I just want to reiterate that I will definitely be sending out all this information, since there was a lot of helpful resources talked about today. So you guys can be looking forward to that from me. But thank you so much, Gail and Jason, for presenting today. This was a lot of helpful information, and thank you to everybody that tuned in. I hope you guys stay safe and have a wonderful holiday break if you get the chance to take one.
Thank you. Yes. Happy and safe Thanksgiving, everyone.
Have a good one.